everybody, and thanks so much for taking your time out to watch Your Revolution Los Angeles. I'm the host, Chris Rod. I have here with us a very special guest, Hanieh Jodat Barnes. How are you doing today?
Great to be here. Thank you,
Excellent.
Chris.
Thank you for your time and everything. You're a Bernie, California delegate, president and co-founder of Muslim Delegates and Allies, former founding member of Women's March LA, and also self-proclaimed shit starter, which I absolutely love. So
I didn't think you were going to use that. Oh my God. I said I didn't think you were going to use that, but hey, if the shoe fits. If the shoe fits.
And that's what we do, right? Because when the country itself is set up in such a way that doesn't actually support the people, but uses lip service towards that, while the rich get away with everything, and the white male supremacy, patriarchal, system is set up against us. This is when we do have to fight back. So this is why I'm saying you're absolutely special, really special guest. And I want people to know a lot more about you. You were also in the People's Convention. You had a great 5-minute speech there. And I'm sure there's so much more you could say, which is why we have this platform here. So let's expand it. Let's get people going. Right now it's 2020. We're in the middle of a quarantine. So, that's a little interesting, but there's a lot of stuff going on, right? Biden, it's right now the two big contenders that are going is, Biden versus Trump. And so I think what's important here is for people to recognize who's going to be here to support us. And if you don't mind, like, my honest opinion is just thinking that they don't, neither of them. But, so this is where we have to figure out what we can do on the side. So, so I noticed that DNC, Muslim Delegates and Allies, something that you're part of. I want you to tell me a bit about that. And I do have a specific question regarding Biden's VP pick. So I do want to get there. But let me ask you, so how did all that start? Just let the people know about that.
Sure. Yeah, I'd be more than happy to. So I founded Muslim Delegates and Allies a few weeks after I was elected as a Bernie Sanders delegate alongside my colleague and dear friend, who I call a sister. We're really that close. Nadia Ahmed, who is also a law professor in Florida, who also served as a progressive Bernie delegate to bring a line on issues that impact the Muslim community as a whole here in this country. Obviously, we had Bernie delegates and Biden delegates who participated on our weekly calls. And, this year, there has been an overwhelming number of Muslims who have gotten more engaged in politics. And I think much of it has to do with the rise of white supremacy, Trump, and just Islamophobia in general. And I do have to say that I think that the Women's March also played a very huge role in empowering women to also rise and say enough is enough. We need we need to have a platform to speak truth to power. Mm-hmm. But we wanted to make sure that the Muslims have a very strong presence at the DNC this year. We had an overwhelming number of delegates, more than the previous years, and we got people engaged. It's really funny how all of this came about. When I speak to Nadia, we were going through the list of all the delegates who were elected and some of the party leaders who were appointed, and we were really looking for Muslim names. We didn't know if they are practicing or if they are even identify themselves as Muslims, but we brought together this group and we started organizing around platform policy suggestions. And much of that had to do with just making sure that the DNC understands that we have a huge role that we play in this country's future, right? With us, with our children and the generations that come after us. And we wanted to, as a female-led 501c3, make sure that we have a space for women who are wanting to run for office, who may not have the tools or platforms to uplift their voices, their progressive values, which is something I have to emphasize on, is that we want to make sure that this is a progressive platform that allows for progressive values like Medicare for all, climate change. And one of the biggest things that we did, which was I'm very proud of, a group of us came together a couple of days before we had a deadline to submit platform policy suggestions, And we completely changed the language of the DNC 2016 platform recommendations, which really humiliated the Muslim community and called us on a number of occasions in different parts terrorists, right? And that's something that we've struggled since 9/11 with that title, because it has humiliated and demoralized our people, our sisters and brothers, and equally the younger generation that is now doesn't want to, necessarily, or didn't want to take part in the politics of the U.S. And much of that language was around seeking to end institutional racism by abolishing mass incarceration, immigration reform, abolishing ICE detention centers, and targeting surveillance and profiling and educational redlining, right? And we also called for the repeal of the Patriots Act, which has, again, impacted the community in a very negative way. But we also focused on making sure that the Democratic Party understands that in dealing with the Middle East, they have to lead with diplomacy and grace and just leadership. We don't want them to police that area. If in fact anything, we want them to leave our democracy to ourselves, our decision-making to ourselves, right? But we also want to make sure that Palestinians have the right to return home, that the refugee camps of UNRWA that are now defunded by the Trump administration have the resources that they need. But we also want to be very critical of the governments that are putting Chinese Muslims in detention centers, as well as right now what's happening in Rohingya and Kashmir. Mm-hmm. But mostly what I focused on was making sure that the Iranian community is also at the forefront of this conversation, meaning that we put language together to have the travel ban lifted from Iran's government that has economically broken our civic society, and also making sure that we stop putting sanctions on countries that impact the younger generations, right? So that's how Muslim Delegates and Allies came about. But what we want to focus on now is making sure that our civic communities and our Muslim and our allies, this is not just limited to the Muslim community, have a platform to exercise their rights and speak truth to power without censorship, right? And also provide this platform for our younger generation to have the tools to run for office, because that's extremely critical, right? We want to see women, especially women, that look like us. Right? I want to see women wearing the hijab more celebrated in this country, as opposed to having their feminism questioned. Mm-hmm. So those are the ideas that we build the foundation around, and we're hoping to grow now beyond the election with voter education initiatives. So.
That's great. So you're saying there's systemic issues that have been going on regardless of, whether, Muslims or allies, of Muslim communities are engaged. Regardless, they're basically, running over, running everybody over, and it's saying, hold on, stop. We've got to change the language, and policies that are ultimately hurting us. And you didn't necessarily want to get involved, but realizing that there's no representation, that's something that you want to push forward towards, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah. So I think it's great. Yeah, go ahead.
I mean, it is hard when, you grow up, and especially after 9/11, my auntie wears the hijab. And, it's hard to walk in the streets of a country that was a promise of a better life to you, and then turn around and look at your auntie suffer by having people look at her. And again, I always go back to the question of feminism, right? Unfortunately, Muslim women, because some choose to wear the hijab or are brave enough to do that, they have their feminism questioned. Like, are you not strong enough? Are you not brave enough? Is it a law that's imposed on you by your religion or by your husband or your father? But in actuality, 100% of the people that I'm surrounded with who are brave enough to put the cover on or wear the hijab have chosen to do so, to identify with their religion, and for whatever the reason, in their heart. So, having that question was the biggest hypocrisy when we're living in a country where women didn't have the right to vote until a couple of years ago,
Right?
especially Black women. So I'm like, wait a minute, okay, you're questioning us, but we may have our abortion bans. Not abortion bans. Abortion rights taken away from us. If the Supreme Court nominee is another Republican, is a conservative Republican. So it's like, oh, so yeah.
Right.
Question. That's how we came about.
Yeah, no, absolutely, and there's so much there to what you're saying, because and also I think the entertainment media has a huge piece to do with that, because while I was growing up, like not really realizing, the issues that are going on throughout the world, just watching TV, watching movies. If anybody were to have said like, oh, a terrorist, it's messed up how what's ingrained in our mind is like you said, somebody with a hijab, or a headpiece, like somebody definitely from the Middle East, an Arab, like that's terrible. When wait a minute, we have white supremacists that are terrorists here, and especially, and so what I wanted to bring up out of what you're saying, I bet you there are going to be and there probably are. I mean, this is where I want to ask: have you seen any people that are fighting back, saying, wait a minute, you want to get more Muslims and more women and have your agenda? That means that we were right. The right wing was right. Look, they want to implement Sharia law and they want to do all this stuff and they want to destroy America. That's what they're saying. I mean, they're smearing. How do you guys, and I shouldn't even be saying that, how does the organization and what's the plan there to fight back with those smear campaigns that they say?
I feel like when in your heart of heart you understand that what you're fighting for is democracy, everything else is just a soundbite, right? We are not new to racism in this country. For God's sake, I'm married to a Black man and I'm raising a biracial child here in America. So racism is not going to be something that I'm, hey, now that we have more progressives rising up, it's going to be eliminated. No, this is something I'm going to have to face, right? So we build on the promise, again, to make sure that we uplift our people. And I don't really worry necessarily about what the white supremacists have to say, because they are the ones that really, disregard and dishonor women in general, right? And, for example, not having the right to choose what to do with your body. And you have a couple of white men sitting around a table, in higher offices telling me whether I have the right to choose over my body or not. So there's a lot of hypocrisy when it comes to that. But sound bites don't when there's a bigger picture and there's more at stake, sound bites don't really matter.
Honestly, that's a beautiful response, because I do see that, what I just brought up as a motivating factor for why a lot of people that are right wing, whether it be Democrats or Republicans, who, vote a certain way. But basically what I'm getting out of what you're saying is just like, look, it doesn't matter what they say. What we do is what counts, and we will have that proof of the record. Exactly. So with that, there's also a push to defund the police. I noticed that you're mentioning that in the, throughout your organizations and throughout the speech. I heard defund the police, defunding the military. We'll get to that. But defunding the police, I see here that in 2017, still, I think it's a little bit more right now, but the U.S. police spending is at $115 billion. Now, there are many people like in the electorate that have family members that are, police officers, so on and so forth. You see shootings that are happening, against police. We don't know necessarily why. Investigations are going on. But, they're stating through a recent Ipsos poll, 60% of Americans say that they are against defunding the police or even redirecting funds. So to me, that makes me think that, either people don't know necessarily what that means, or they're just firmly against it, and it's going to be hard to move the U.S., especially since, every time I would read a story about it, the mention is since the 1990s, for the last 30 years, crime rates have dropped. So maybe the $115 billion budget is appropriate. What do you say to that?
For God's sake, look at LA, for example. The mayor in Los Angeles proposed a 54% allocation of budgets to the police department. When every time you walk downtown Los Angeles, there's homeless people dying. Literally, in the richest country in the world, people are sleeping on the sides of the streets. It just doesn't make sense. And so I really have to admire and I have to really uplift the work of organizations like Black Lives Matter Los Angeles and organizations like the Poor People's Campaign that have, supported and elevated and uplifted the people's budget that essentially redirected 150 million of that budget towards schooling and making sure that we have adequate resources in our cities. And I very much encourage people to really look at the people's budget within their own cities and their own area and state to see how they can put together coalitions to come up with the data that is necessary or ask what it is that their people really need. We need to make sure that, first and foremost, we need to make sure that the police officers have accountability and training. If you are going to serve as a law enforcement, and if you are going to serve as someone who's supposed to be there to protect me, you have to have adequate training to do so. We also have to add social workers into our police departments. We have to, because otherwise we're going to see more Black men pile up and their bodies are going to pile up and we're never going to rest. Unless this country heals, the entire world is going to be in problem, right? And I feel that we really need to, as a country, really look at our police budget. We really need to study where this money goes, and we need to start organizing with grassroots organizations and efforts to make sure that we reallocate those funds back to our social, service programs. We live in a country where 37 plus million people have lost their healthcare that's tied to their employment in the midst of a pandemic. More people in this country file for bankruptcy because they just simply cannot pay their medical bills. And you have not only billions of dollars that's allocated toward policing marginalized communities instead of taking that money and empowering them by providing them with education. We also have a $740 billion military spending in this country. It's larger than Russia's, Iran's, China's, just to name a few.
Jeez.
And then when we have that really hard conversation about how do we pay for Medicare for all, mm-hmm. Oh my God, all of a sudden we're talking about something so dramatically, what is it? We're socialists now. Right. We just want for people not to die. Really, it's simple as that. So I hope that we as a country start leading with more grace and kindness rather than move where the money pushes us, right? The corporate interest pushes us. So. Right.
And the corporate interest is pushing Joe Biden in a certain way. And this all ties in here where I mentioned that, since you're part of a delegation for the Democratic Party, here we have now ostensibly the leader stating on September 11th, saying, quote, "We don't have to defund police departments. We have to make sure they meet minimum basic standards of decency." Now, I studied law. And decency is just a subjective term that they can get away with virtually anything. So he wants to increase the budget. He's mentioned that before. As it is right now, the budget, I believe, for the military, give me a second here. Yeah, the budget for the military, too, that one's something we'll get into in just a bit. So, yeah, I kind of want to hold that off because I almost went there. Sorry, my fault. But, so with that being said, how is it then that we can say that, I don't know, that I'm just kind of, I'm almost stumbling here just because when it comes to Biden, why is he saying the same type of talking points that you see from the right wing and from the Republicans? And what can we do, and what are what the Muslim delegates and allies, what is it that the plan is for Joe Biden to push him forward, into a And can we do anything?
Of course we can.
Okay.
I think the rise of women like Ocasio-Cortez, the rise of women like Rashida Tlaib, rise of women progressives like Cori Bush and Ilhan, and so many other progressives who are now finally standing up and saying, hey, listen, this is the country. If we don't fix it, this country is going to go to hell, really, right? And it's going to dismantle internally. I'm happy to see the movement flourishing. I'm happy to see us electing more progressives. And I think that really needs to be what we build on moving forward. I look at it, I don't look at 2020 as, you know, an election that I'm very excited about. However, what I'm very excited about is that once we have this fascist out of the White House, we start putting the pressure on Biden's team to make sure that not only are they upholding the progressive values, which is really basic human rights, Chris, when we talk about Medicare for all, a climate where people can breathe without getting, you know, their lungs filled with, you know, debris and just dirt and pollution. We have to push for progressive values. We have to make sure that we elect progressives in office. And we also have to really focus on making sure that we follow through on a grassroots level, right? But you know, I'm excited. I'm not, you know, I know that there is a ton of confusion going on right now in the world, and there's confusion happening here internally. But I'm very happy that we have progressive women and men standing up and fighting for people, fighting for the rights of people, fighting for Medicare for all, for a Green New Deal, for defunding the police, defunding the military, starting peace movements that essentially do better for all of us, right? Especially people of color. So right. I'm very excited about that. But hey, we have work to do. I'm not gonna sit here and say I'm happy that, you know, things turned out. I mean, we were very hoping that Bernie Sanders would be the nominee, and that we could really move this country toward a very progressive platform. But again, we have a fight that we're gonna have to really be strong with and about. So.
Nice. And so you're saying no naivete. We know for sure that we got to even push Joe Biden if, you know, he becomes elected at that point. Because
I mean, the alternative, look at the alternative. We think that things are bad right now with 4 years of Trump being in office. Can you just imagine what the next 4 years is going to look like with him?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, there's so much more to say on that. Okay. So then defunding the military. That's something I haven't heard much of. I mean, I always hear of, oh, you know, we need to cut back the military budget, you know, so we can allocate that towards other things. But yeah, as you mentioned before, you know, the Rohingya Muslims, you know, Uyghur Muslims in China, you know, is a huge issue, especially, you know, genocide in Yemen. And the fact that the U.S. is stoking tensions with war, you know, in Iran from, you know, decades. But I mean, you know, in my lifetime, you know, more noticeably seeing McCain in 2008 and Hillary Clinton all throughout. And of course, now with the Trump administration, you know, throwing away the deal, you know, for the nuclear weapons deal. So, yeah, so my thoughts on all that, you know, I think you're completely correct about needing to defund the military as it's doing all these atrocities, and even supporting a right-wing government in Israel over Palestine. So I really want to get kind of like the whole story essentially over that, defunding the military along with these issues. What do you think it would be the best solution for the U.S. to do then?
I'm a child of war, Chris. So I've firsthand witnessed the trauma that war brings to a country. And unfortunately, and I'll tell you, it's very hard to witness the uprising of our Black and Brown communities and the crumbling of our democracy amid a pandemic that has lays bare the systemic racism in our society and not think about what the roles of the role of U.S. In also in my region of the world, which also dismantles democracies and also is a number one reason why we have so many refugees that are forced to flee their homes, but they don't have a place to go to, right? So when you have it's almost, for me, it's so surreal to see how the military and how our armed forces are treating the people who are rising up against police brutality in this country, and not go back to my memories as a child of war in Iran, right? I hardly ever share this story, but I was a very young girl in Iran when the war of Iran and Iraq was at its peak, right? And we really don't know what it was about, what it was for. All I remember is that we were taught to really hate the Iraqis, and vice versa. They were also taught to hate the Iranians we were combating. And again, sure enough, Saddam Hussein was overthrown by the U.S. government, years later, but they were allies in that war. And I remember watching TV. And we would watch television programs, cartoons. I was really young, and all of a sudden our television would go red, and there would be a siren in the background saying, "You need to seek shelter because bombs are going to drop."
Oh, wow.
And we used to rush downstairs, and all I remember is my grandmother holding the Quran and holding my hand in hers and praying and listening to the radio to see if we can get a signal to go back upstairs to live a normal life, which was no longer. Because what they do in times of war, what happens is not only young men and women are the ones that die, but our natural resources like our water, it gets cut off. Our electricity would be off for days on end. And just imagine the trauma the country has had to go through since then, now with the sanctions that are imposed, right? So, I mean, as I have to say, this has brought up a ton of memories for me, as a young woman. And when I see the same injustices happen to children in Yemen, which is like the number one humanitarian crisis globally right now.
Yeah.
And I see what role U.S. plays in it. It almost makes me feel like I want to tell my dad, who passed away a few years ago, is this the America you promised me, Dad?
Whew, wow. That's, right.
And I feel like I find myself in this really weird position where I fight more for democracy here than some of my colleagues who are second, third, fourth generation Americans, who may be used to this, or maybe the same promises weren't vividly drawn for them as children, right? So it's a tough place to be. But I have to tell you, the creation of Muslim delegates and allies is to make sure and to ensure that we touch upon really tough conversations like this. Most of the people that we have on our board, and most of the people that are delegates, come from war zones, come from Palestine, come from places like Libya, Yemen, Iraq, India, where we now see the atrocities in Kashmir. And, I have to say, when Bernie Sanders suspended his campaign, I felt like a part of me died, right? But I also have to tell you, I now find myself finding leadership in me rather than in him. I am empowered, right? And I feel like he would have been that one person that would have changed the dynamics of this country from the heart.
Right.
But I'm now finding leaders in myself, right, to change and to continue with that push on foreign policy, making sure that we are putting more resources in our own communities, with making sure that we mobilize on a grassroots level to look at the people's budget, to implement it in different cities, and to question.
This is wild.
Yeah.
Oh, my apologies.
No, that's fine.
I'm really sorry. You were saying the question.
No. I mean, it just it's bittersweet, but we're gonna continue to push and speak truth to power until we have a world where our Black men have the same exact resources that our white men do in this country. That they're not put in jail because they're carrying weed, because in their communities, education is not a something that is allowed to them or afforded to them, so they have to go to the streets and sell weeds, and then therefore they get incarcerated and spend time behind bars to make license plates for a penny or two, right?
Right. And that's, very touching what you're saying. And I think which is why it's very important for people like yourself that come out and organize and help others because of your realization of empowering yourself, saying, hey, it's no longer Bernie. I can't give up. And I mean, I was even reading articles about what Women's March LA did. And, just to wrap up here, because unfortunately we're running out of time here, but in this year, this is 60% of the participants that were there, there's a Women's March, were first-time participants, first-time activists. And I believe within that, you're going to find leaders within there that will help bring America to the promise of, like what you said, that your dad told you, when you were younger. Right. And I think we need to move it there. And I really believe, and I'm getting chills right now, that all the work that you're doing right now is honestly helping us get there.
Thank you.
So, so thank you. Gosh. And so, just to wrap up here, is there anything, that you'd like to share, for others to get involved in any of these movements? If there's anything new going on with the organizations that they could push forward. So what was it you'd like to tell people?
So I would really encourage for everyone to really visit MuslimDelegatesandAllies.org to stay up to date and engaged. We do have tools that we provide for people to register to vote, find out if they're registered or not. But the one thing I have to say, Chris, which is the last thing I will add, is that we have to vote in this election. Yes. We are going to hold our noses because, as progressives, this wasn't supposed to end this way for us, right? We wanted a better future. But the fact that my mother is under a travel ban because she's an Iranian citizen is a nightmare in a democratic country. And so if we give a platform to this fascist for 4 more years, imagine what happens to our country, right? It's going to be harder to fix it back up in 4 more years than if we were to start in 2020 and put together the broken pieces of our democracy, which is, again, it's a shame that we've come here. But and I would advise the democratic establishment to listen to the size of our marginalized communities they do not reach out to our Black mothers who are suffering, Black women who are suffering in this country, right? Because their children are being shot by the police, because their children are behind bars without the opportunities. Our Muslim people who are begging for some equal rights or some sort of representation within the campaign, the presidential campaign, that continue to get pushed behind the lines. And I would say, but I think, when you look at the broader picture, I'd say, we have to, this year, we have to really vote. Whether you like what's, given to you as your option or not, think about this for 4 more years and think about what it's going to do to our country. So it's very important for us to get behind that right now.
Excellent. Hanieh Jodat Barnes, thank you so much for your time, your insight, and just sharing your heart with us. Really, really appreciate that.
Thank you, Chris. I appreciate you.
You're very welcome. Thank you, everybody, for watching. You guys have a great one. Hey, guys, thank you so much for watching this video. If you liked it, please tap the like, hit the bell, subscribe to us, and support us on Patreon if you want to join the cause to help us get corrupt bribes out of our nation's news media. Thank you so much for watching, and remember, this is your revolution.